Okay, welcome to the Saturday morning edition of the Sumer Sports Show. We ran a little long there on the intro song. It's early for all of us. Ben has made it back from his fatherly duties of being a hockey dad, right? Hockey. What else? What
Hockey
else were you
life.
working on with?
I mean, that was it. We are, fully embracing the Minnesota background that we have, basically 100% hockey. It seems like all the time. I know other people have moved on to spring sports, but we are, kind of in the thick of it, I guess, still. So Saturday morning, early ice session with the youngest two, and now we're back just in time for the San Antonio, our Brahmas, basically. Kicking off here in a half an hour where we've already seen some line movement. So I'm like locked and loaded now. I have no other responsibilities. My oldest son might try and get me to play some pickleball later, depending on the weather and the wind and those sorts of things. But other than that, I'm watching UFL football. Maybe a little Final Four. I don't know. So it's been good though. We'll see. What do you got planned for today?
I am going to let's see. I'm gonna get off this broadcast. I'm gonna sit. I actually, people forget this. I am an academic, so I have to referee papers. So I got a paper published with Tage in the Journals of Quantitative Analysis in Sports. So now I've been reviewing papers for them. That's kind of how it works, I guess. So I have about 10 pages to read. I'm going to read that during the first quarter of our Brahmas, right? If people looked at the Sumer Sports UFL preview last week, we were high on the Brahmas relative to the market. They kicked ass last week. Now they're 2-point road favorites
Favorites. Yep.
this week. And look, it's vibes right now. We have a model that uses a little bit of the PFF grades. They use a little bit of the my preseason priors. Use a little bit of coaching. People forget that Wade Phillips was a NFL coach. AJ
Right.
Smith is like not only a pretty good offensive mind, but like a really good, like he has a VR company, he has a film watching company, a really good offensive mind. I make the game 4.5. It's a 2-point game. So for anybody in the comments section, this is a game that our friend Diggs probably who's phenomenally sharp, somebody I look up to quite a bit. It says the biggest joke on this show is I say we're not going to talk about gambling, and then we talk about gambling the whole
The
time.
entire time. We just led into it at that point,
It's like the
right?
biggest
So
bit ever, but that's the one. We'll talk about the whole slate here in a second. I do want to talk to you briefly about two NFL moves here, because firstly, while I was at the Atlanta Hawks facility on Wednesday, they broke the news to me. Interestingly, Stefon Diggs was traded from the Buffalo Bills to the Houston Texans. The Bills actually take on $3 more million in 2024 cap hit to take on a second-round pick next year. The Houston Texans, of course, get Diggs. They get him at like a pretty big discount, and this is why,
right.
folks, when you think about these contracts and you think about guarantees and how they're structured, you do have to worry. So like the cap number for Diggs this year is 5.8 million, and then he's got 4 more void years. If they were to only play Diggs this year and then void out the whole deal, he would be worth 16.6 dead to the cap next year. Obviously, if they like him and they sign him to an extension, those 16.6 million then can get spread out through the duration of the next contract. That's how voids work. That's the benefit from the team side for voids. The benefit from the player side for voids is that Diggs can get basically Diggs can get out of Houston in 1 year. Also,
Right.
not going to count as a comp pick. And I think my comp pick article came out Monday. It was really well received. But the one thing that Over the Cap really did a good job with in their comp picks article years ago, which I think was really shown to be true here on Wednesday, was you're not qualified for the comp pick formula if a player, or sorry, you only qualify for the comp pick formula if the player leaves without your control. In this case, Houston changed the contract so that he could leave after a year. So he's not qualified to be a comp pick player. We have ZT in the comments with some interesting comments. Sumer Sports should build a physics engine. Look, we're just trying to
Don't
build
tell PTJ that.
for NFL teams right now. We'll get there, ZT. Firstly, as a Minnesota Vikings fan, Ben, do you feel vindicated at all that Stefon Diggs wore out his welcome in another place, or was his time in Buffalo a success? Obviously, Justin Jefferson has been great in Minnesota as well, the first-round pick they got back. What are your thoughts when you see Diggs moving on to Houston for both sides?
Yeah, I didn't know if it was like a completely like sour grapes type take from me, and feeling like the Vikings very much look like they kind of came out ahead in this whole ordeal. Basically, obviously, we don't want to judge the situation this far after the fact from the Vikings perspective, but it does at least seem to me like there was some. I get why the Bills moved on from him for a second round pick, and I actually think that's relatively good compensation. Kind of like you said, they are eating a little bit of his 2024 salary. But to me, like there still had to be some underlying issues brewing beneath the surface in order for the Bills to do this trade, I would say right now. And I think that's maybe the thing that, like, you know, as a Vikings fan, you have to feel better about getting the first round draft pick. I do think, you know, post Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams trade and the compensation that they got, in some ways, it does seem like the veteran receiver market has at least taken a little bit of a step back in what guys are going to get from a trade compensation standpoint. Obviously, that's very much driven by the contract situation, but the fact that like the Bills did get a second round pick for Stefon Diggs in what could very effectively be like a 1 year rental sort of thing, I think in some ways has to be a win, but very much like kind of closes the championship window in which they have, unless they do a ton of maneuvering around the Josh Allen contract situation. So to me, I think I feel in a lot of ways, you know, vindicated from a Viking standpoint. I feel bad in a lot of ways for Bills fans because of the situation that arose, but I also think it's weird because going back to it, like the Josh Allen and his early year career arc made it really difficult for the Bills to kind of build and maximize his championship window on that rookie deal, because it took so long for them to figure out really what they had with Josh Allen, that they never really got to experience some of like the Joe Burrow impact and what we're seeing with CJ Stroud now. And in some ways they had, you know, a little bit of a Band-Aid fix getting Stefon Diggs, but it very much did not work out for them. And I think longer term, like the direction of that franchise seems very much, I would say, in peril right now.
Well, yeah, let's expound upon that, because I think you bring up a good point. By the way, one of our favorites, very difficult, may or may not have been mentioned earlier in the chat. Beat Gamer there's a quality of this year's draftable wide receivers, decreased trade prices, possibly. I think it's not like it's been this way for a long time. You are trading for the contract of the player, of which Diggs is a lot. And yet Buffalo is eating a significant amount of it too. So I just think Diggs, you talk about 13 consecutive games at a 100-yard game last year. He was very tepid at the end of the year. I think football has a pretty good beat here. For elite wide receivers like Diggs, is age-related decline slower? Is it still steep? Very difficult, by the way. It says Showboat Steam coming in right now. Are we going to get negative?
Oh no,
negative. Brahma's opinion is going to get negative. Is going to get negative feed right now. Negative
pounded
UFL. Who knows? Is it worth anything? Good question here. We'll get
Diggs
to that
is moving markets against us right now.
But to your point, Ben, let me present really quick one thing here on the Josh Allen deal, and this is from our friends at Over the Cap. This is his contract. This isn't unlike a lot of veteran quarterback contracts, Ben, but it does speak to, I think, one of the things that you talked about, which, Allen in 18 as a rookie was not particularly great. 19, that Bills team was good at 10-6, bowed out in the early part of the playoffs. But as a passer, not the best. So, but at least gave the Bills enough of a license to go out and get Diggs. 2020, they're all,
that was that year. Yeah, that was the year. Yeah, that was the breakout, right? Yeah.
And then he gets an extension, and after that year. But notice this ramp up period. You're now, and a lot of you do get, like, a lot of this is a product of the renegotiation, restructuring and everything. And so a lot of these cap numbers that you're seeing here are a reflection of the fact that they pushed money into the future to bring in Von Miller and everything. But the to your point, when you look at Houston in contrast to Buffalo, Houston has said full speed ahead now, year 2 of CJ Stroud, and they're getting to do all of the things, the Donnell Hunter, the Aziz El-Shaair, the backing into Dalton Schultz again, all of those things in year 2, which means that when the bill comes due, you're going to be earlier into CJ Stroud's second contract, which means it's just going to be a little less spendy than it was for Buffalo when you're 24 with Josh Allen. There's not a lot you can pack into these last few years because you've already done a decent amount of that by the structure of the deal, by virtue of the fact that he was a little bit later to rise up. And that's, whereas with I this at all for Houston, right? Because you're year 2, and it's sort of like when Kansas City, it's actually a little bit different. Kansas City had 1 year sitting Mahomes, but they knew right away from watching him on the bench that he was great. They went with Sammy Watkins at an overpay right away in year 2 of Mahomes. Then in year 3, they went out and got Frank Clark. Like, they kind of started early because they knew Mahomes was good right away. Because Allen took 1 more year than, for example, CJ Stroud did, it is good. It was harder to sort of break up with the idea of winning with the quarterback on a rookie window than it will be for Houston possibly. So it's a very interesting one. The last one I want to talk about before we get into some of the markets here, before we close out the show and go watch some UFL football. Derek Brown, he gets about a $25 million per year deal from Carolina. When I first wrote it up in 2020, I was like, Derek Brown probably doesn't offer enough as a pass rusher to be worth a top 10 pick. I will say this: Carolina has not been a successful franchise since drafting him at 8. Like, there was opportunity cost there, but Derek Brown has turned out to be a hell of a player. Just 8 sacks in his career, or per the PFF numbers. I can't remember what the official NFL numbers are. But he's certainly been productive. He both almost a 10% run stop rate, more than a 7.5 pressure rate, which is pretty good for an interior, for a nose tackle. This is an expensive time to need an interior defensive lineman in the time of the 2 high shells and needing to 2 gap at the NFL level. Carolina has spent a lot of money now on 2 guards and a defensive tackle, and then they went out and got Josie Jewell as well. Like, they're truly trying to build up the middle here. It does seem like they're going to go wide receiver in the draft as a result, Ben.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on the wide receiver take, and I think, not to completely, turn this into something where we're just promoting other work, but I do think, like, you and Thomas's and Rick Spielman's discussion last night on the Sirius XM show that Sumer Sports does, like, it kind of got into the fact that there's just not a ton of guys that are 350 pounds and can move relatively quickly, right? And so there is a lack of players, especially up the middle, that can really help teams. And I think in some ways, like you said, the opportunity cost of taking that type of player at 8, that definitely happens. But the fact that the pool of players that can even serve those sort of purposes from an NFL perspective drives up that price. And I think your take with PFF in 2020 has very much come to fruition, right? I think that was kind of the point in time where we were still evaluating, the impact of run versus pass, run defense versus pass rush versus coverage, and all these other things. And in some ways, even though rushing the football we understood wasn't that valuable, there was this weird gap in our knowledge and understanding before you wrote the Derek Brown article that I think in a lot of ways has kind of shaped the direction of where, NFL defenses have kind of taken. And if you don't have that guy up the middle, like, you are going to struggle on early downs to be ahead of the change from a defensive standpoint. And if you can't get third and crucial stops, and you are playing a team that is going to be aggressive on 4th downs, like, you're going to have really difficult times getting off the field without touchdowns happening. So I don't mind the play, even with the direction of the Carolina Panthers roster and the fact that it does seem like they are still multiple years away. But I think longer term, like, what they do in the draft this year, and obviously absolutely having to hit on some late round value in order to kind of restock the shelves is very much the direction that I think the Panthers absolutely have to take this offseason, or, the Derek Brown contract just isn't going to be enough to really move the needle for them in the NFC South.
Yeah, the Brown had, so the Panthers had about 3 million in space before the deal. Brown was counting 11.6 on option. So, Taylor Moton has, probably about 14 million that you can convert. Brown's deal probably makes his first year cap hit a little bit less. Tepper seems to be an owner that's willing to spend money on the team, obviously. And so, Robert Hunt, for example, like his first year cap hit in that $25 million or $20 million deal is only 6 million. So they're very much a spend and prorate team, which is different, right? Brant Tillis was the cap specialist or the cap guru with the Chiefs. Lamar Hunt, or not Lamar's son, Clark Hunt, famous for not wanting to spend a lot of money. Brant Tillis's instruments in Kansas City were much different than the ones he's going to be able to use in Carolina, where he can spend bonus and prorate the way that he couldn't in Kansas City. It'll be interesting to see what Carolina does, because now they'll probably free up cap space with this Brown extension, and and as the cap goes up, the cap value of $1 decreases over time. So smoke them while you got them, especially when you're obviously young and he's on a rookie contract and you've kind of committed to him because you traded so many draft assets for him. Let's now, because we have 14 minutes until this great slate, we'll talk about the draft odds in a second here. Let's talk about the infamous or the famous UFL, because that's what the people came to.
I mean, it was a dog under league in week one, basically. I know the one game
league now. Yeah. We do have to be careful because we don't want to mislead the audience. Memphis was a dog to open, but was a favorite to close. So at close, we had favorites in Birmingham and Memphis win and cover, and then we had dogs in San Antonio and Michigan win and cover.
Right, yeah.
And then every single game went under. A few games went over the first half total and then just died in the second half. And that is the thing to think about. And I do wonder from people who know ball, and I think very I can't remember which difficult we're getting today, whether it's simply difficult, thankfully difficult, or very difficult. But I'm interested to hear the chiming in here. But I do think, like, even the AJ Smiths, who I think are very good play callers in this league, I do think that there's a little bit of the whole, like, Christian Bale, hey, that was a great first drive, now let's look at the unscripted plays, right? I do think that is a little bit of what happens in this league, where you get some decent offense that happens early in the game, and then down the stretch, the defenses are just better than the offenses do, because the offensive minds in the league just aren't quite as good. And so, that might lead people to bet fewer first half unders than they do full game unders. Again, indexing on 1 week of sample is probably unfair, but
that's the only sample we got, right?
But that's a mechanism I think is testable over the course of the season. Again, with small sample sizes, you don't really have the empirical basis for some of this stuff, but you can build off of mechanisms and angles, I think, here. So let's start with the first game. The first game is the San Antonio Brahmas. We have seen, and as Difficult said, this has now moved down. It opened at 1.5. It got out to 2.5 in some places, including FanDuel here. Now, I believe Steve Fezzik gave out 2, +2 for Memphis here, the Boats, with Case Cookus. It's now down to 1.5 again. Total 39.5. I think that opened north of 40. I think it's still 40.5 in some places, but now it's 39.5. This is the one where I make the biggest discrepancy. I think the Brahmas played good defense last week. I think offensively their skill positions are pretty good relative to most in the league, probably third best in the in the UFL. I think the Showboats played pretty good defense last week, but they played the worst team in the league in the Houston Roughnecks. So I just don't really know how much I can take from that. Cookus had like pretty much one good offensive drive, and they had a defensive touchdown. So I don't know really what to take from that. But we saw this last year when they couldn't protect him. They had like the worst offensive line Philadelphia did in the USFL, when he's not protected, it gets pear-shaped like incredibly fast.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I don't really have a strong lean on the total. I think that's actually come down a little bit as well. But I don't know. I thought Wade Phillips was kind of in his bag last week, to be honest with you. He had the punter basically throw out a touchdown as well in a lot of ways. So I think to me, we're obviously going against Steve Fezzik. Apparently, he's got some sway in the UFL.
Well, we're going against somebody because
it's moving down to one now. Basically, I think maybe you kind of wait till close. I don't know how much time we have here. We've got 5 minutes or something, but and that's another discussion as well. I know we haven't like fully fleshed this out either, but to me, empirically, like the points between three don't carry as much weight given the extra point rules in this particular league. Like I think like 1, 2, and 3 in general in some ways aren't the same calculus basically as what it is. Also, we did get up some minus 115 movement here, it looks like, as well. So we're getting a little bit of pushback. It'll be interesting to see where Circa closes on this particular number, as we move towards kickoff. But I like Brahmas. I like him first half.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you if like you were going to play something on the total, especially if they're basically just fitting the full game number to that second half spread. But you get a bump up on the spread there or on the total now as well. This is fun to watch in real time. The market's shifting a point here and there. But I would be looking at kind of like you said, just empirically, I do think the second half unders are the spots to be on, especially if you're able to kind of evaluate and watch the games, just seeing if the teams have performed at all from an offensive standpoint after their scripted play set, how well the football is actually being moved. Because I do think in a lot of scenarios, like the second half unders.
Sean asked a good question, which is, do you think the UFL will become a developmental option for offensive linemen given the struggle in college? I think development. I think development for offensive line has been a problem since the new CBA. I don't know if the NFL just doesn't do a job of looking forward on things. There are great people that work for the NFL like Michael Lopez, but I just don't know. But I just don't see the league like doing anything proactive in that regard. But it's a great thought, Sean. I agree. What's funny, Ben, is other than this game, like I'm kind of like bang on a few of these other ones. Like if I look at Arlington, St. Louis is a team that should be a lot better than they are. One of our friends, Bruce Gradkowski, is the OC there. It opened 4 and 41 and a half. It's now 5. I said I was bang on. I'm not. I make it 3.5. Bruce has run good offense there, but it's been a little bit slow to go at times. And last week it was as well. Like they didn't score in the first half of that game a touchdown. They scored 2 touchdowns in this fourth quarter, and still lost. I mean, they still gave up a 64-yard field goal to Michigan, who I think is reasonable to say is one of the worst teams in the whole league, and they lost that game. The Arlington Renegades, won the XFL last year with a losing record. They were competitive they should have gone into halftime last week with the Birmingham Stallions with a lead,
right?
And gave up a huge touchdown to Deion Kane down the sideline to close the half, which probably tilted a lot of people who were holding some money line tickets on first half and things like that, and first half under. I think that this is a little bit of an overreaction to Arlington's first game. I think Arlington's a little bit more. Arlington's a little bit better than this, but 5 is not necessarily a key number here either, though, and so you just have to be a little bit careful there. I think when you look at the Birmingham Michigan game, 6.5 and 6 here, trending towards 7. I'm not offended at all by this. I make it 6.25. 41.
You do have it at 6.5. Okay, that was one I was wondering on how quickly people would update with Michigan's performance last weekend, but obviously the juice is leaning in the direction of the Stallions. I don't know. I think if I was going to place a spot there, I feel like it'd be Michigan first half more than anything else, right?
Yeah. Pro Football Focus had E.J. Perry, the quarterback for Michigan, with 5 turnover-worthy passes last week. And when I watched that game, and admittingly, I was in and out of that game more than any of the other ones. But when I was just watching that game, I actually thought, again, and this is why you need data. And you can, again, I'm saying this more to like rip on myself than anything. But when I watched that game, I actually thought he was good. I thought he did some things. He ran for 2 touchdowns. He moved around a little bit. They had some turnovers, but I thought some of the turnovers were kind of fluky at times. But he did put the ball in harm's way too much, and that in this league, the offenses aren't good enough for you to have turnovers because you're not going to come back over the top and win on offense by answering, because you're not good enough on offense to answer very much. And then lastly, and again, this is another one where Birmingham can be so good offensively. I think Matt Corral is differently talented than most of the quarterbacks in the league. And Adrian Martinez, I'm not a huge fan of, go Huskers, but I do think like when the Birmingham Stallions are involved, I'm not going to be as like, I'm not going to be as willing to like under in a game like that, even though it is the highest one there. With Renegades Battlehawks, it's the same thing. Like I think if St. Louis clicks, they have great offense with great support.
But that's going to come and go, it seems like, especially early on in the season. Exactly. Has been the direction of the
you could lose that under
general
by a ton, or it could be a no doubter like last week.
Right.
The last one, which is
the game of the week. Yeah.
Last one, which is interesting, is the Houston Roughnecks. And I do think that this is where some actual people got like messed up here, because the Roughnecks have the same name as last year's XFL Roughnecks, but they are the Gamblers from last year's USFL, and they just changed names. And so they have like, it's not like last year's Roughnecks had Wade Phillips on the Brahmas now. And like, this is legitimately the worst team of the league. They're 5-point dogs against DC. Jordan Chiamu has been in a lot of spring leagues. He's played well at times, and the DC Defenders were really good last year and were in the championship game. But Jordan Chiamu is too inconsistent, I think, game for game to get the deference I think that he does in the markets. I make this 4.25, so it's not that playable, but it is interesting that he gets as much love as he does. This is the one where I think under is probably the best play of all the totals. So take that for what it's worth. But Houston is like legitimately dreadful, I think.
Right.
And will be tough to watch all year. Reed, Stinnett / whomever else is playing quarterback for that team. I got to remember the name of the guy that started last week. Jarek Warrantano. They're terrible. And so that's the extent of your sort of that's the extent
read on the under
your UFL preview for this week. But okay, let's talk about the draft. We did see some movement, Ben. We looked pretty sharp for a little bit on our last Saturday show where we said stop listening to the people when it comes to the top 2 pick. And I gotta rant for a little bit here before we go.
Please.
The aggregator accounts have gotten worse. And it starts with Pro Football Talk. Pro Football Talk just made an article about the fact that Drake May was the favorite to be second. Are we like sports books are now becoming the content creators for?
They are. That's been. I feel like it's in some ways been that way for a little while. Like they are the content creators, but people just write articles on divisional odds and everything else at now, right?
But at least they, Sean is part of. Sean gets.
I don't know if we ever had Florio, to be honest.
No. Pro Football Talk was a legitimate news source and one that I really admired for a long time. But yeah, we lost Florio a long time ago. But we had Florio for a while.
Fine. I'll give you that one. Okay, but yeah, back to the draft odds and the rant, basically, for the top 2 picks, basically, and what Florio did.
So he just like, and I've always had a problem with like the Vikings territory people thinking that, like the people who write for Vikings territory being like, thinking that they're real content creators when all they are doing is copying other people's content and like presenting it as their own, right? Like, I have a huge problem with that. And I have a huge problem with, like Mike Florio is, like just writing about Drake May being the favorite to be second. It's like the sports book and all the sharp bettors are doing your work for you. That's bullshit. Yeah, bullshit, right? But then, of course, Now Jaden Daniels is the favorite if you look at
And
FanDuel.
kind of continues to push out a little bit. I think he was like minus 125 when I checked earlier this week. Now he's out to minus 150.
Yeah,
on
and this is
FanDuel.
equilibrated. So we're all adults here. We're all adults here. So we know that Caleb Williams is going first. But second, he and very difficult. Who is my North Star, my shining light, my guiding star here. Don't feed the trolls, aka Mike Florio. But yeah, so we have Jaden Daniels as the minus again, and minus 150 is not a big favorite in the betting market in the draft on April 6th, but he is favored to go second. Drake May at plus 150. So there's not actually a ton of it's big free there. It's not a huge deal there. And then you have McCarthy, Williams, Harrison, number 3 overall pick. Again, not a ton of. Not a ton. May is even money. Daniels plus 160. McCarthy plus 440. Now, I don't believe this to be true. From my perspective, I don't think it should happen. I don't think it will happen. I just don't think it will. If I gun to my head, I think it's Williams. I think it's May. And then I think some team trades up for Daniels. That's how I see it happening. And I think Marvin Harrison goes fourth. And I think cooler heads prevail. And JJ McCarthy goes
ninth or
somewhere
10th.
else.
Yeah.
And then Penix and Nick, and he's Penix to me. Penix and Knicks are lucky to go
mid to late first round.
Yeah. They're lucky to go in the first round. And if you bet under 4.5 at a big positive price, you are sweating you're sweating your balls off in that first round, but you win. And that's again gun to my head, but with a ton of uncertainty, right? A ton of uncertainty, and again, I could very well see it going Williams, Daniels, McCarthy, May, and Kwesi Doppelmans is the biggest freaking hero in Vikings history. Like that could happen too. And as Kwesi's friend, I'd be pumped for Kwesi Doppelmans if that happened.
Right.
But if it gun to my head, I think I think the best bet here is JJ McCarthy at plus 440 because he's got the traits, and we've seen it before. Like teams will buy traits that high, and and that could certainly happen. I think Sean's big build the MF statue if that happens. Yeah, I agree. If the Vikings get, I'll say this: by hook or by crook, if the Vikings get Drake May in this draft, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is the best GM in Vikings history. Like it's just
King of the North, right?
Like it's happened. He kept the team competitive, which is exactly what ownership wanted him to do for 2 years, and he ended up with a quarterback. He ended up with the second best quarterback in the draft. And that should be a thing.
I do think that JJ McCarthy, like the one that I saw move quite a bit this week was I think at pick 4 for JJ McCarthy, who is all the way up to, you should click on that expansion basically for what the pick number 4 is for JJ McCarthy.
You want to look at 4? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because that was the one I thought moved pretty dramatically from, maybe not. I thought it was closer to plus 250 now.
Yeah. That's another one where, the market is telling you one thing, and literally every swinging dick on
X.
On X and ESPN is telling you a different thing.
Right. It is true. And to be honest with you, and we've talked about it for weeks. I know, Sean as well mentioned like his favorite bet is being the best defensive player not named Dallas Turner. Like we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but like there's just so much uncertainty at the defensive position, but also with respect to what people think the Arizona Cardinals are going to do at pick 4, whether they do trade or take Marvin Harrison. But to me, I think I still, and I know we've talked about this every single week so far, but I think ad nauseum, like there's a much smaller chance than what people are projecting that the Arizona Cardinals move off of the 4th pick. And if they stay at the 4th pick, I think it has to be Marvin Harrison Jr., no doubt.
I want to talk about as well. I think we'll go to about 12:10 before we go out and watch some UFL football. The 7th pick, right? Where we're looking at the 7th overall pick, Joe Alt. What do you think? Tennessee Titans. I was on Blaine and Mickey. Ben, we have such charmed lives. We get to go on these radio stations with people like Blaine Bishop, who played safety on the
Yeah.
Oilers and Titans when they were in the Super Bowl.
Legend.
I'm sitting there, and he's asking me what I think. Like, who the hell am I to tell Blaine Bishop what to think? But he's like, are they taking a tackle? I'm thinking to myself, if Harrison and Neighbors are off the board at 5'6", which that's a big assumption, of course. At 4, 5, and 6. That's a big assumption. But if they're off the board and it's Roma Dunza playing third wide receiver to Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, or it's the best tackle prospect that the NFL has seen in a little bit of time, right? And then going into round, and I believe the Titans have a pick. Let me make sure before I say something ignorant, but I do want to make sure to double check that the Titans have a second round pick that's really high here. I'm just going to make sure before I say something dumb. Yeah, they have 38. So if you're at 38, you get a wide receiver that's like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman.
You could have the option of like whatever guy falls out of the first round with that pick, right?
And historically speaking, and these are L's that we've had to take. Like, historically speaking, you're going to get a better tackle. Historically speaking, it's a better bet to take a tackle at 7 and a wide receiver at 38 than the other way around. Like that's history, because a tackle has to be kind of you can't scheme around a tackle. He's got to be kind of a complete player. Right. At a wide receiver, he can be, especially in that current situation that Tennessee has, he can be a complementary piece to Ridley and Hopkins almost immediately and be successful right away. And even if he ends up being like a McCole Hardman type, that's not like a great pick, but it's also not a disaster. McCole Hardman wasn't a disaster for Kansas City, even though he wasn't exactly like a booming success.
Yeah, I think the question is more for pick 7, like if it's Alt or Fashanu, to be honest with you. I think like Sam and Steve at PFF, I think had that discussion this week. To me, I do think Alt is clearly better, but whether it's Fashanu or Alt, like I think that would be the one question mark for me. But I very much agree with you in the fact that like even with what the Titans kind of did this offseason, like I'm not necessarily in the same situation as the Houston Texans whatsoever, but I feel like they can at least think like they might be on the verge of being able to win a down AFC South as well. And they've kind of signaled that in a way with going out and getting L'Jarius Sneed and going out and getting, at least some guys that are going to contribute right away. And I think if they're looking at the 7th overall pick, they got Tony Pollard as well, L'Jarius Sneed, basically. Kelvin Ridley kind of signifies like they do in some ways are building up this veteran roster to win sooner rather than later. And I think if they're evaluating this draft class, like, it very much does make sense to go out and call that pick 7, given what we've seen from a performance standpoint of top 10 picks at, the tackle position and just how much immediate impact they can have right away and how much clearly better like the top 2 guys are at the tackle position, just in general for this one. So I do agree with you. I think my question is basically like, is there a scenario where Fashanu could potentially be that selection instead of Joel, which I'm not quite sure I know.
And I think so. I do think so. I think that the way to hedge that is obviously to bet that they'll take tackle. If you're not sure about Alt, Talise Fuaga, Fashanu, then you just don't play in this market. You play in the what position they'll take, and you go with a position as the Titans' first pick. I'm not sure if it's available on.
I don't think they've listed them yet, basically.
On one or the other, and you go ahead and you take tackle for them. The other one, and this one does seem to have moved a little bit in the direction, but this is the Falcons pick at 8, and this also doubles as a who is the first defensive player. And we'll wrap up with this: Dallas Turner. We talked about edge players and interior defensive linemen on the Sirius XM show with Dimitrov. I know some people have asked. Thomas will do one of these shows relatively soon, but we have been swamped with some things at Sumer, so we've only done the one show a week, which has been the Sumer show. So just bear with us. But Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Quinyon Mitchell, the corner from Toledo, Laitu Latu, and Roma Dunze was an offensive player, and then Terrion Arnold, the corner from Alabama. That looks like, this is interesting. So Sam just wants to weight run blocking at 0. that could be, and maybe I have some influence on that. Maybe I have to pay for my sins a little bit. But yeah, like, so this particular one. Oh, by the way, there are scouts, and I have seen, we have talked to some people. There are scouts that do think that Alt is not the best tackle in this class, and
Right.
I don't agree with it. I actually read like a really good blog post by Seth Byrne, who's I think his blog is phenomenal actually, and he has Alt first, but most of the people have alt first, but it's not everybody, and it's interesting. And I do know that there are people that don't have alt first. So just because you think just because they may go with a tackle doesn't mean it has to be alt. Okay, so with the Falcons, this is one where this could be as simple as don't overthink it. Dallas Turner is considered, I believe, by most to be head and shoulders above what you're seeing with Verse and Laitu. Mitchell and Arnold could be somebody where they go to with corner to go opposite AJ Terrell. So that's certainly a possibility. Adunza, I think, is a possibility as well, although they short up and they've gone skill position the last 3 drafts.
Right.
So I don't know if they go with that. But if you think that they're going to take edge, which they do need a pure pass rusher on that team, I think Turner is the play here. And then the question is you just have to price it out and say what you think that percentage is before you go ahead and make that play.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind Dallas Turner at this price. Basically, I think there might be I think my second favorite option is really Quinion Mitchell, like you mentioned, basically opposite AJ Terrell. They obviously have Jesse Bates in the back end as well. Like, I do think that kind of rounds out a pretty strong secondary unit for the Atlanta Falcons. And then you're just kind of situationally rotating pass rushers for this year and trying to land that guy next year. So I could see a case for that. I do think Mitchell is far and away the best cornerback in this draft class, and could see, because of that and the lack of play, the lack of play behind him, I think in some ways that could push him to be a top 10 pick. So I don't mind it. I would not be surprised as well if the Falcons move off of this pick and kind of move down in the draft and maybe stockpile some other picks later on in the first round and kind of get like the 3rd or 4th best option at the edge rush position. But I think right now that would be my one concern, because like you said, if the JJ McCarthy hype isn't real, I do think one of these quarterback needy teams that are sitting like 11th, 12th, 13th, or 14th are going to get impatient around pick 7, pick 8, and kind of want to go up and get JJ McCarthy if they are actually in love with him as much as what people are projecting right now. So that would be the one concern betting into the number 8th overall pick market. But if it is the Falcons, I actually lean maybe more towards cornerback being an option than what the current betting market projects right now.
Big decision here in Memphis as to whether or not they're going to call this uncatchable.
Oh no, I don't even have it up yet.
They're going to call pass interference. The Memphis, the showboats of Steve Fezzik's money are moving the football on the Brahmas here, which is good for the over, good for our friend Cleve TA, one of our favorites, who liked the over in this game. Good for Stormy Bonatoni, one of our favorite broadcasters, also, who has the over in this game. For those who like the Brahmas, though, a little bit of early tension here. A little bit of tension. The fact of the matter is, before we close this broadcast out, the Falcons should take a quarterback, because Kirk Cousins has a 2-year deal, and he's 36 years old, and he's coming off of an Achilles, and he's not the long-term answer at that position. He's going to get them to 8 wins, hopefully, for the first time since Thomas was their GM, but they should take a quarterback. And if that means trading down and getting Penix or Knicks, that's great. If not, they should take JJ McCarthy if he falls to them, because if they don't get quarterback right, it doesn't matter if they can't rush the passer to an extent, as we found out last year with Desmond Ridder. This has been a lot of fun. Ben, I can't wait to commiserate with you over UFL today, the NCAA tournament tonight, the women's NCAA tournament tomorrow.
Our page buckets, man. What is up?
Look, the gods, like, that was, an incredible cover by Paige Beckers, down 9 with just a few minutes ago, going ahead and covering that 2.5 by the grace of God. But But it was a sad loss for our Minnesota. Look, Minnesota can't win anything. We all know that.
We
Poor
know.
Paige
We
Beckers.
know.
Hopefully she
Sorry,
goes
Sean.
Hopefully she finds somewhere else to go. Although the Lynx have won a bunch in the W. Hopefully she can find a place and go and win in the WNBA where everybody can see her brilliance. But this has been a great time. We got to see Ben's brilliance here. For Ben Brown, this has been Eric Eager. This has been, and producer Matt Stofsky. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.